Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you. If you're still coming in, we've got a couple of seats at the front if you're looking for like a bigger group. So it's really wonderful to welcome you to lunchtime number 4. My name's Ashley. I'm at Hatfield. I study anthropology. I'm in my 3rd year. And it is such a joy to welcome you. So Vision is a space to explore the person of Jesus Christ and to grapple with some of the bigger questions of life. And we're so grateful that you've chosen to join us for this lunchtime. Today, we're going to be looking at the topic, Am I More Than My CV? And so just to give you kind of an idea of one of these, if you've never been before, what's going to happen is Sam is going to share for about 20-25 minutes on the topic. And during that time, my number will be on the screen behind me. So you can text in any questions that you want. We'd really love this to be an open space. So if you disagree, if you challenge, if you really agree, if you're kind of intrigued or you weren't sure what he said, we'd love to hear from you. So do text in your questions. And then just after that, we'll have a couple of questions and then we'll pause. So if you've got 2 o'clock lectures, although it strikes, so maybe not, you can head out to those, or we'll pause then and then we'll go back together and have a longer time of questions. So if you can, we'd really encourage you to stay. So this is Sam. Sam's going to share. But just before you do, Sam, a question. We're talking about CVs and achievements and things. So if there was one achievement that you wish or you thought you should have done, but you haven't done it yet, what would it be?
Thank you. Many of those things. Last year, my New Year's resolution was there are certain classic books I feel like I ought to have read by now and haven't. I've never read anything by Charles Dickens or Jane Austen. And I thought I really probably should have read one of those by now. So I was determined by the end of 2019, I'll have read at least one book by each of those 2 authors. Still haven't touched either. So that's my current failure that I can think of at the moment. Thank you for being here. It is great to have you. We don't take your presence here for granted. We're very thankful that you've decided to join us and hope you'll find this time together stimulating, interesting, thought-provoking, discussion starting, all that kind of thing. So am I more than my CV? Melanie Steffen is a neurobiology scholar. I can't say that, let alone study it. And she wrote an article for Nature magazine. And she said, I did well at school and later at university, earned a PhD position of my dreams, and have published several papers. This is the story that my CV reveals. But that is exactly the problem. My CV does not reflect the bulk of my academic efforts. It does not mention the exams I failed. It doesn't mention my unsuccessful PhD or fellowship applications, or the papers never accepted for publication. At conferences, I talk about the one project that worked, not about the many that failed. And as she reflects on that, she then makes a suggestion. She says, why don't we compile a CV of failures? She said that might inspire a colleague to shake off a rejection and start again. So Melanie Steffen makes this suggestion, let's all do a CV of failures. Someone takes her up on that idea. Another academic, Johannes Haushofer, I think is the name, a professor at Princeton University. He published his CV of failures in 2016. And it's 2 pages and it's split up into the following sections. Degree programs I did not get into. Secondly, academic positions and fellowships I did not get. Thirdly, awards and scholarships I did not get. 4, paper rejections from academic journals. 5, research funding I did not get. Many examples of each of those. This CV of failures that he put together, he put it online. It kind of went viral. People were applauding it all around the place. People said things like, it's inspiring, it's brilliant, it's beautiful. And so he then added a line to it at the bottom. He says, in the latest version of it, he's put something at the bottom that says, this is my meta failure. This darn CV of failures has received more attention than my entire body of academic work. But here's the thing, everyone kind of got in on this and was excited about it and kind of applauded him, but virtually no one followed his example. In other words, we like looking at a CV of failures, but we don't really want to produce one ourselves. We're glad when someone else does. It's good for some people to do that. It's good for people to know that this is what academic life often looks like, lots of failures before you actually get anywhere. But we're also quite glad if we don't have to be the ones to do it ourselves. We like some people to be honest, but perhaps we don't want to be that person ourselves. And we can see why. A CV is a kind of a risky thing to mess around with. And let's face it, in the case of Mr. Johannes Haushofer, you know, he's got a job at Princeton. And so he's kind of safe. He can afford to be honest with his failures because he's already made it to somewhere pretty good. He's got a lot of security already. He's got a good role at a great university. The fact is that from a very young age, most of us are trained to care about having a good CV. Don't know what age you began to be conscious of the fact that you needed to have a list of things that would make you look good. But for some of us, it goes back even way into primary school. We're taught to think about what our grades are going to look like to a potential university. We're told to think about what even our extracurricular hobbies are going to look like to someone who might one day employ us. And so our CV becomes how we spin ourselves, how we try and look as impressive and as employable as we can be. CVs, we're kind of trained to think, are the best way of achieving more, of advancing further, of becoming wealthier. And so we spend years and years of our lives finessing and perfecting our CV. I remember when I applied to university, we called them UCAS forms. What do you call them? They're still called UCAS forms? I'm sorry, I'm like 1,000 years older than you guys. We had to do the kind of personal statement thing where you kind of talk a little bit about yourself and you try and show some of your personality. I mean, it is, for most of us, let's be honest, it's the greatest work of fiction we've actually written. I remember teaching a friend of mine how to play, chopsticks on the piano, so that he could put on his, CV, accomplished pianist. Accomplished in this case being a slightly relative concept. And the reason why we're told this matters so much is because we're taught to believe that achievement is a zero-sum game. There are only so many opportunities. There are only so many well-paid jobs. There are only so many places at the particular university or program you want to get into. And so if someone else gets there, you won't. And the only way you can get there is by making sure other people don't themselves. And therefore, we can't be seen as failures. We can't be seen as people who have weaknesses. And if we're not careful, we start to think we are our CV. And I remember joking with my friend when he was writing that personal statement. I said, I don't know what's more frightening, that you're writing this stuff or that you might actually believe it. But that's kind of true of all of us. We start to measure life by achievement. And it doesn't matter what kind of achievement it is. You may know the movie Chariots of Fire. Sorry, if you've been here all week, I only seem to know movies from the mid-'80s. But it's about some Olympic athletes. One of them is a sprinter called Harold Abrahams. And there's a scene in the movie where he's explaining why he trains so hard for the 100-yard dash. And he's just about to go out and compete, and he says, I will have 10 lonely seconds to justify my existence. And maybe that's how we feel when we head into an exam, or when we head into a job interview, or when we head into a sports match. We think, I've got however long to justify my existence. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think the reason these things bear down on us so much is because there is a haunting question underneath all of this. And that haunting question is, am I enough? Can I be enough? How much do I need to accomplish before I'm actually okay? When can I stop caring about my CV? Madonna was interviewed in an article for Vanity Fair on one occasion, and she said these words, and I've got to commend her honesty. You know, one of the most successful people at what she does, right? She says, "My drive in life comes from a fear of being mediocre. That is always pushing me. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, but then I feel I'm still mediocre and uninteresting unless I do something else. Because even though I have become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. My struggle has never ended, and I guess it never will." Now, Madonna is unusual in what she's achieved. She may be, I don't know, no idea what she's like. She may just be an unusual person. Who knows? I think she's honest about something that is true of most of us. And it's interesting because she says, "My fear is being mediocre." And she says, "I can push past one spell of it. And there's this moment when I discover I am a special human being." You get there. You arrive at the destination. But then she says, "I then feel again that I am still mediocre." That sense of we've got there, we can exhale, we're okay, is fleeting. Because we then need to realize we've got to get to the next level. And so we worry about our CVs because we worry about whether we actually count. Whether actually our life means something. Whether we have justified our existence, whether we've been worth the oxygen that our lives have kind of taken out of circulation. Now, this is not a new way of thinking. This is as old as the hills. If you've got one of these little flyer things, maybe you're sitting on it. I've put here a little extract from Luke's Gospel. Jesus used to tell these really short stories called parables, and this is one of those short stories that Jesus told. And I thought I would use this to help us think through this whole issue. Don't worry if you can't find yours, there'll be one around somewhere. So let me just read out what's going on here. This is in Luke's Gospel. You can Google this passage, you can look it up yourself and see what you think of it. We're told, this is an extract from the Gospel, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable." Okay, so Jesus has got a short story he's going to tell, and he's telling it to a particular audience. The audience is people who are confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. That is, people who think they have been able to justify their existence. People who prided themselves, in this context, on how scrupulously they followed the kind of commands of the Old Testament. Jesus is talking to a group of people known as the Pharisees. And notice we're told they were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else. Those two things go together. You can't believe that you have made it without having other people, by the same definition, who haven't made it, who you are now superior to. So that's who Jesus is telling this story to. The story is about two people who go to a temple and pray to God. So Jesus tells this parable, you can follow it through. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, so one of those guys who's convinced they've made it, and the other, a tax collector. Now, no one in any culture likes tax collectors. They're never the good guys. But at the time of Jesus, they were especially hated because the Jewish people were living under the occupation of the Roman Empire. It's just, horrific situation to be in. And the tax collectors were fellow Jews who were taking money from the Jews to give to this occupying force. So they were seen as real betrayers. Many of them would have been corrupt. And so they were totally loathed by everybody else. So Jesus says you've got these two people walking into the temple. One is a Pharisee, someone who was meticulous about obeying all the commands in the Old Testament. And the other one is a tax collector, someone who's a turncoat. Listen to what Jesus says about each of them. Listen to what the Pharisee says. The Pharisee prays and says these words, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all that I get. In Jesus' story, that's how the first person prays to God. And this person is doing two things. He's playing, firstly, the comparison game. He's saying to God, listen, hey, I'm so glad I'm not like those other kinds of people over there. The way he can feel sure about himself is because there are so many other people around he's convinced he's superior to. And so his sense of being okay, his sense of being right, his sense of being enough comes from knowing that there are other people who are further behind him. Those two things always go together. But the trouble is, if you base how you see yourself on comparison, there are two reasons that can't work. The first is there is always that insecurity that someone else is going to come along who does better than you. If you're playing the comparison game, it can really backfire. But also, even when you kind of make it, whatever it is that you are aiming for that will make you feel like you've achieved enough, even if you get there, as Madonna has shown us, it doesn't take away that underlying issue. So assuming the vast majority of you are undergrad, some of you already have in your mind the kind of thing you would like to happen after you finish. It may be a particular program of postgrad study that you would love to do. It may be a particular job that you really want to go into. You may have in mind the particular grade you hope to get at the end of your degree. And you can kind of keep yourself going now thinking, if I just get that, then I'll be okay. Once I get through finals, once I get the result I need, then I can actually relax and content myself that I'm now okay. Pretty much every single person who has thought that and has actually got to where they're aiming at has not felt okay. Rockefeller was one of these kind of crazily wealthy people in the, 19th century or something. One of these kind of, I should have Googled this before I stood up. I can't even remember what he did, but he owned $1 gajillion or something, right? So a rich guy. Someone once asked him how much money would be enough. And again, commend the guy for his honesty, because he already had owned most of the solar system at this point. His answer was, how much money is enough? His answer was just a little bit more. You always think you've got a target that will get you to be enough, and there's always something beyond it. You never actually arrive there. So this man Jesus is talking about is playing the comparison game. The other thing he's doing, which again we so easily do, is he's playing the compensation game. He doesn't just compare himself to other people. He then says to God, I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. And here's the thing, it doesn't take much to find this out, but nowhere in the Old Testament did God say you had to fast twice a week and give a tenth of all you get. You did have to give a tenth of certain things if you're going to be obedient to the Old Testament law. You did have to fast on some occasions. But this guy is basing his confidence on the fact that he can keep rules that were never actually there in the first place. Why? Because it's compensation. When you know deep down in your heart that there is something lacking in who you are and how you live and what you do, it is easy to become unnecessarily obsessive in some particular area of life. There's an area of life where you know you don't measure up. One of the ways we compensate is we become over fussy in some other area of life that doesn't need it at all. and we think it will make up for it. So I can think of a father that I know who, he suddenly got really, really fussy about what his kids watched. He suddenly started policing what his kids watched on TV, became very kind of puritanical about what was allowed to be screened at home. It turned out he had been cheating on his wife. And it was as if over-parenting in this one particular area and becoming obsessive about that would somehow make up for the fact that he was failing as a faithful husband. So he was becoming obsessive in one area of life as a way of kind of self-medicating that sense of guilt and lack he felt in another area of life. And that is what trying to justify ourselves does. We latch onto something and think, well, as long as I'm doing amazing at that one thing, that will make up for the ways in which I feel deficient in other areas of life. So Jesus says that is how this particular Pharisee prays. He does the comparison thing, he does the compensation thing. Jesus continues the story by telling us what the tax collector prays. The tax collector walks into the temple, one of the most kind of objectively immoral people at that kind of time. He walks into a temple, a place symbolizing God's presence, and he prays as well. Jesus tells us that this man stands at a distance. He doesn't kind of just saunter up to where he thinks God is. He stands at a distance. Jesus says he wouldn't even look up to heaven. It's like, I don't feel I can look God in the eye. He beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's what he prays. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He doesn't try and pitch himself to God. There's no bargaining, there's no negotiating, there's no, I know you wanted this, but hey, I've got that instead. He doesn't say to God, listen, this is what you've got to understand about me, God. These are the things that have happened. This is why I am the way I am. You've just got to kind of know what's going on with me. No, he comes before God with one thing. He says, effectively, I know I'm not right. And therefore, the only way I could ever have any good thing going with God, if he's there, is if that God was just kind to me in a way I don't deserve. That's what mercy is. It's undeserved kindness. So he's not trying to justify himself. He's not kind of trying to present his spiritual CV to God. He just instead decides to be honest. He's saying, listen, I don't have anything to offer here. In fact, the only thing he brings before God is his need. But listen to the punchline Jesus gives of this story. He says, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Jesus is saying two really astonishing things. Life could be amazing if we believed these two astonishing things to be true. The first is, Jesus says it is possible to be justified. It is possible to be someone who can look at yourself in the mirror and actually say truthfully, you are okay. It's possible to be justified in God's sight. It's possible to be someone that God can look at and say, as far as I'm concerned, you're okay, you are enough. But here's the second thing Jesus wants us to know. It's not the Pharisee. It's not the kind of spiritual high achiever who is justified. It's the failure. It's not the one who thinks he has enough to win God's approval. It's the one who knows he never could have enough. In other words, Jesus is trying to show us that God doesn't work the way we tend to think he does. We think that if God is there, if he even exists, he's a God we have to be able to impress. And so all you need to do is get enough in your life of whatever it is that God should be impressed by, and then you'll be okay. And Jesus is saying the God he claims to reveal isn't like that. Jesus says that the God who he claims to reveal is a God whose heart is for those who know what they lack. His heart is for those who are honest about just how messed up their hearts are. God's heart is for those who know they are not enough, rather than for those who think they are something. To those people, Jesus says, God justifies. He gives them as a gift the status of being enough, of being okay, of being right with God. But that can only be given, it cannot be attained. And the reason for that, as we finish, is because in just a couple of chapters of Luke's Gospel time, Jesus is going to hang on a cross in Jerusalem. He's on his way there as he gives this little story. And what Jesus claims to do on that cross is to take our not enoughness, that's now a word, by the way, onto himself and to treat it as his own and to give us as a gift his perfect enoughness. And that is how we can be right with God and therefore right with ourselves. Now, where does that leave our CVs then? Do we just ditch those and not care about them at all? Well, not necessarily. Here's the difference that knowing Jesus can make. Jesus frees you up to fail. If through Jesus we are actually okay in God's sight, I can live with failure. It won't crush me. It won't destroy me. But here's the other thing. If you trust in Jesus, it also frees you up to succeed. Christianity is not against trying to get a good job, trying to attain a good goal or whatever it might be. But if we know our confidence is in Jesus and what he's done for us, we will be able, if we succeed, to succeed in a way that doesn't make us the kind of people who become arrogant and who look down on others. We can be nice about it if it happens. I don't have to see this as a zero-sum game. If I get somewhere, I don't have to trample on other people. I don't have to think that I'm better than them. Jesus just releases us from all of those things. So if you never make it to whatever it is that you are supposed to achieve, that can be okay. That is not the end of life. That was never actually going to be what was going to make you feel enough. And if you do make it, that also can be okay. It doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to take over you. So, am I more than my CV? I really hope you are. You are so much more than what you achieve or what you don't achieve. But actually, our ultimate okayness, our ultimate enoughness, is something only God can give to us. You don't have to justify your existence. God is willing to do that for you. Hey, thank you for listening. Thank you for being so polite. I'm going to invite Ashley back up. We'd love to tuck into some of your questions.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. So just to remind you, we'll do a couple of questions now, and then we'll take a quick pause. If you've got 2 o'clock lectures or something else to get to, you're so welcome to leave. But we'd really encourage you to stick around. So the first question we've got on the phone is, isn't the Bible just basing ourselves on lessons for how we should behave in life? I thought we shouldn't compare ourselves to anything, even the lessons of the Bible.
Thank you. Good question. The first part is, it isn't. What was the question again? The wording of it?
Isn't the Bible just basing ourselves on lessons for how we should behave in life?
No. I mean, I know it's often taken that way. And sometimes you'll meet Christians who will present it as if that is the case. But the Bible is emphatically not a list of lessons to learn. The Bible is many things. At its heart, it is a story. It is a narrative. The main subject of which is how we can never be what we are meant to be. We just can't do it. We're just not good at being people. And the story of the Bible is God providing what we lack and what we could never have. And so the whole Bible, in fact, is about God showing mercy to us through Jesus Christ. So it's not a slightly more Christian version of, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. It's not habits of highly successful people. It's not life hacks or anything like that. I mean, there's wisdom in the Bible, to be sure. But what the Bible is about is not fundamentally, here's a list of kind of targets for you to aim for. The Bible, if anything, is a story about how we can never do that. And the God who is there is a God who's kind to us and gives to us what we can't earn ourselves. So, yeah, hope that helps.
Wonderful. The next question is, if we enjoy our academic success, how should we behave towards people who just don't?
Who don't enjoy it or who don't succeed? Let's assume a bit of both. It's a good thing to enjoy. I mean, academic success is not immoral. It's not wrong or anything like that. It can be a great thing. It can be good for you. It can be good for others. Your academic success could be a way of you actually serving other people through what you are understanding and studying. So we're all for that. What we shouldn't do, though, is make any academic success the basis of how we value ourselves. It's too easy to think that if I get that PhD, if I make some breakthrough, that makes me a better person. So we just need to see ourselves in a healthy way. And then, as I said, that can free us. Actually, you could even become a high achiever who doesn't become a jerk. That would be great. We can enjoy your achievement and we can enjoy you. It's nice to have both. In terms of what that means about how you should feel to others, certainly if you make it and some other people around you don't, then obviously, again, not acting as if you're a bigger deal than they are is going to help on this. And the best way to not act as if you're a bigger deal is to not think that you're a bigger deal. So you may think, man, I've been able to do this thing. You can be thankful for what you've been able to do without kind of making that next step of saying, that makes me a better person than other people. Actually, your friends can celebrate with you, even if they don't get there themselves, if, again, you celebrate it in a way that doesn't make you superior or arrogant. In the kind of language Jesus uses, that it doesn't turn you into someone who's confident of your own righteousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, cool. So the next question is, Sam, why do we really need God to self-justify our existence despite our failures? Is sheer self-confidence not enough to rationalize our endeavors?
Thank you. So the way the question is presented, do we need God to justify ourselves? The point I'm wanting to make is we can't justify ourselves at all. That only God can. I can't remember what the second part was. It was so well written, by the way. Whoever wrote that was kind of.
Yeah, it's good.
I'm assuming
is
you're an
sheer
English
self-confidence not enough to rationalise our endeavours?
Well, again, self-confidence is, I'm no expert on this, so some of you may know, have actually studied this and can correct me if I'm wrong. The thing with confidence is, again, it can often be founded on things that are just not secure. So we may be self-confident because of something in particular. It may just be because of the way we look or what we can do or any of those things, those are all things that can change. You may just be someone who just naturally has a certain self-assuredness. And that's no bad thing. I mean, it's better to have that than to be kind of utterly plagued all the time with anxiety. But the fact is, even that won't in the long run be enough to justify your life. There are some people I'm assuming who may go through all of their life with the feeling of, hey, I'm completely happy with myself. But my experience is the more life we get under our belts, the more nuanced our view of ourselves and our kind of sense of confidence, actually the more nuanced that becomes. So even if someone has a lot of self-confidence now, that may not always serve them further down the road. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. If you ask the question and you're in the room, you want to stick up a hand, or if someone else wants to stick up a hand and come back on that, I would love that if I've missed the point of the question.
Yeah, if anyone's got a question or a comeback, we'd love to hear it.
In one sense, I guess I'll just add, again, it is possible to be deluded, isn't it? So in one sense, self-confidence isn't the issue, because even if you are confident in yourself, if you're not actually everything you think you are, your self-confidence isn't necessarily a good thing. So I would say confidence can be a double-edged sword. Again, I hope that makes a modicum of sense.
Yeah, cool. Does anyone have any questions from the floor that anyone would like to kind of chuck in? It's okay if not. We've got more on the phone. Cool. And also, if you do, but you don't want to stick your hand up, please do text it in. We'd love to hear from you. So the next question is, what should we do if we understand that we are more than our CV, but actually, like, what does that mean for us now? Like, what do we do with that?
Thank you, yeah. So what I meant by that was, our humanity is about far more than what we can achieve. If we use that aspect of life to be the kind of yardstick by which we measure our humanness, then actually that's going to give us a very defective view of other people. So we're more than our CV. Whether your CV looks amazing or looks terrible, you are more than your CV, because the sole purpose of your humanity is not simply to achieve a bunch of stuff and to get to a certain level. We are made for far more than that. Part of the insight of the Christian faith is that it shows us we're made fundamentally to know God, and we're made fundamentally to know and love one another. That is what real life is about, and God has given us things to do. He's given us abilities. He's given us things that can be of service to other people, but you're more than your CV means there is more to what makes you you. There is more to what makes you valuable than simply what you can do and what you can achieve. So it would be bad to think your CV is what makes you someone, and it would be really bad to think that not having a great CV is what keeps you from being someone. Again, it comes back from our belief that God has made every single one of us. None of us is a mistake. God actually came up with the idea of each one of us and loves us.
Cool. Any comebacks on that? Any questions? No? Cool. Yeah, if you come up with something, do just stick up a hand. We'd love to hear from you. Next question. What about people who drive to be better in order to help other people? The people who need to sell themselves through lies and deception to get a position to have enough power to then help other people. Is that wrong to have an overall goal that's good, but a process that's wrong to it?
That's really interesting. That's a great question. Obviously, wanting to help other people is a morally good thing. We're for that. Yeah, that's great. Again, if we base our whole sense of self-worth on that, it's going to come back to bite us, because there will always be something more we could have done. We can never do enough for enough people to kind of really feel that we're completely okay. So if your life becomes fundamentally, first and foremost, about trying to do good for other people, you'll never get there. So the doing good is right. That's worthy and a good thing to be doing. But as something that will justify you, it will never work. Now, the question talks about, what if you have to kind of lie and deceive to get to the place where you can help other people. Again, I'd be very hesitant to commend that, simply because the very act of lying and deceiving and whatever else may be involved, cutting corners, trampling over some other people, all of those things do something to us. All of those things actually bit by bit change who we are, change our capacity to do good for others. So it's a really double-edged sword, because if you have to keep justifying immorality on the basis of some future good you can do, actually you may be reducing your capacity to do good in the future. You just may be turning your heart into the kind of heart that doesn't ultimately want to do good for others. So it's a really risky game plan because it may start off with noble kind of intentions. You know, I know this is wrong, but I genuinely think if I get there, I can help other people. It can start off noble, but eventually the means itself starts to change us and the kind of people we are. It can become more about us and less about helping other people. So I don't want to suggest that immoral means justify moral ends. I think God cares about both.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Do you want to grab? Thanks.
Thank you. Rove. Thank you.
I was just going to say, if that lying deceit is considered, say, sinful, but God is always willing to forgive your sins, might you not say that lying deceit to get in a position to then help people, and you're forgiven for that, it might actually be worth it? Because you know at the end of it, if you beg for God's forgiveness, he will forgive you.
Yeah.
And then you're in a position now to help people. So surely it's kind of a win-win?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think not, simply because part of your premise I completely agree with, that actually deceit is forgivable. Jesus says on one occasion, and this is amazing, he says all the sins and blasphemies of people can be forgiven them. There is nothing we can do that can't be forgiven if we seek forgiveness through Jesus. But real forgiveness and real seeking forgiveness actually involves not just owning up to what we've done in the sense of acknowledging that we've done it, but actually coming to terms with it. And so seeking forgiveness actually does mean being convinced in the depths of our heart that what we've done is wrong and that it matters. So we can't presume upon having that posture at a certain stage in the future. So I can't say, well, we've got the example of deceiving, I'm just going to kind of lie in this season of life and then I'll come to God for forgiveness, because God knows what our hearts are like. He forgives those who truly turn away from the wrongs they have done. But if our future turning away from our wrongs is part of some calculated way of getting to where we want to ultimately be, he's not going to buy that. We've got to be sincere. So yes, we can be forgiven anything, but we can't presume upon that forgiveness in a kind of God's a slot machine, and if I just shove in a bit of saying I'm sorry, he will definitely give me lots of forgiveness. We've actually got to be broken by him, where we're actually pleading, like this guy in Jesus' parable, where we are grief-stricken. We're told in that parable, this is weird for us, that this guy beats his breast. That's not a Durham thing to do. That's not a kind of Western thing to do. But in some cultures, that's a sign of being grief-stricken. And so the tenderness and forgiveness God has on offer is to those who are grieved by the wrongs that they have done. Not for those who've just said, well, I know I can do some wrongs and presume upon God to forgive them later on. Does that make sense? Does that help? Thank you so much.
Yeah, cool. Another question from the phone. What would you say to someone who said, why isn't it enough to just listen to Jesus' teachings and be good enough? Why do you have to trust in him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I guess if you're listening to Jesus and trying to do his teachings, there's a sense in which you are trusting in him, because you're trusting that his ways are worth trying to live by. But it's interesting, if you actually listen to the teachings of Jesus, a fundamental part of Jesus' teaching is that you can't be good enough. And so this isn't a spin I'm trying to put on what Jesus says. This is bound up with what Jesus says. So some of Jesus' most famous moral teaching comes in a section called the Sermon on the Mount. So kind of impactful on our culture that there are bits of it we know, even if we don't know they were said by Jesus. And so I've heard many people say, well, let's just live by the Sermon on the Mount and not make it more complicated than that. But the Sermon on the Mount says at the very beginning, the people God will bless, the people that God considers high-fiveable, are people who are broken in spirit and who do grieve and mourn the things that they do wrong in their hearts. We're not going to be blessed by God without coming to terms with our own frailties and our own limitations. That's right at the front door of the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus isn't giving us a system of, here are some good things to do and that will make you enough. What Jesus is giving us from the very beginning is, you can't ever be that person. But God blesses us when we come to that realization, and he forgives us. And that forgiveness begins to change the kind of people we are. We're going to think about that tomorrow. So I hope that answers that question. Again.
Yeah, has anyone got a question or would like to come back on that? No? Cool. Yeah, we'll stick with the phone. Yeah, does Jesus want me to succeed or just to be content with being enough?
Thank you. These are thoughtful questions. That's great. Jesus, yes, in one sense, but probably not in the sense we often think. Jesus wants us to succeed, but we've got success completely misunderstood. We think of success, again, in terms of whatever we most value, whether that's attainment, achievement, education, wealth, good for others, service, all of those kinds of things. We've got our own calculus for how we measure success. And so we can say, that person is more successful than that person, and we've kind of got a way of measuring all of these different things. One of the things Jesus keeps showing us in his teachings is that you can be a success in life whilst being a failure at life. And again, we sense something of that. You read a story about someone who is maybe a really, really high achiever in their field, but they are just a catastrophe to their kids. And at some point you think, was their achievement worth it? Were they really a success? And you start to think, well, maybe they weren't. If they got all of this stuff, but the cost of it was just destroying people all around them, then maybe actually that is not real success. So Jesus wants us to succeed at life, not necessarily to be a success in life. And to succeed at life actually means having a relationship with our Creator. It does mean, as we've been saying, finding in Jesus and through his death that real deep sense of you are okay now, you are enough now. And then that releases us to do what we can do, whether that turns out to be a lot or whether that turns out to be relatively little. It frees us to do that because we're not then basing our life on how much we do or don't do.
Yeah, cool. Quite a different question. Yeah, there's two parts, but I think the first part actually, someone's just sent me a response to what you just said. So I wonder if
let's do that.
We should do that. Cool. Does that mean that the potential he's given us, if we're his creation, is not really that important?
It's not insignificant. It's not ultimately important. We all have different potentials, right? I mean, we're not all the same. We have differing things that we can do, that we're good at, all those kinds of things. There's variety in that. We're not all going to end up doing the same thing to the same extent or in the same way. I've totally forgotten what the question was. This is what I'm failing at.
Does that mean that the potential that he's given us, if we're his creation, isn't really that important?
Yeah. So yeah, it's not unimportant. Again, it's just not ultimately important. It's important enough that you want to be the person God has made you to be. If you've got particular talents and passions and skills, it makes sense to run with those. You want to go with the grain of how God has made you. But it's not ultimately important in the sense of your entire sense of worth and value is not bound up with whether you reach your potential. So as long as you don't make it ultimately important, it's not going to hurt you to go for it. But if you think it's what is ultimately important, it's only going to crush you.
Cool. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about success and achievement and things. So another question we've got on the phone is, yeah, we know what God thinks about success or achievement or what that looks like, but what does God actually think about me?
What does God think about me? That is a really great question, isn't it? I think God thinks a number of things about every single one of us. We Christians believe from the Bible that God, as I've said, God has made us. So you didn't just happen to exist and now God's got to work out what to do with you. God made you, God thought you up. As I've said before this week, he came up with the idea of you in the first place and was having a good day when he did. So he thinks that about you, that there is something that is unique, that is valuable and worthwhile about you. We know that is the case because even though, as I've said, we don't do a good job of being us, God still values us so highly that he stepped into the world to redeem us, to repair us, to put us back together. So God considers you worth his while serving, to the extent of stepping into this world as a human being and growing up and living a human life, dying and rising again. So God loves you. God values you. And God, he's not that impressed by you. Which is why we do need him in his love to come and reach down to us. I think he gets a kick out of you because he made you and he came up with the idea of you. But I don't think God has ever in the history of the universe looked down at one of us and gone, whoa, wow, that's really, really impressive. Because he's God and we just don't do that good a job of being us. So one of the things that the Bible says repeatedly is that God opposes the proud but lifts up the humble. So part of how God thinks about you is in response to how you think about him. And if you're walking around Durham thinking that you are a massive deal, then actually God wants to humble you. Whereas if you're walking around Durham going, do you know what? Actually, I really wish I did a better job of being me. Someone put on Twitter once that life is basically a long bad date with yourself. I can't find out who did that, but I love that phrase. If we walk around going, do you know what, I'm actually very aware of my limitations. I'm very aware of my brokenness. I'm very aware of the kind of the crazy that's in my particular heart. That is what God draws near to. That is what endears us to him. So irrespective of how you're doing on that, he does love you. You are precious to him. He isn't impressed by you. And the most loving thing he may need to do in your life is to humble you. Because then the most, even more loving thing he can do for you is to put you back together and to make you whole in Christ. Cool.
Does anyone have any comeback from that or have anything to ask from the floor? Cool. If not, we'll finish up with one last question. So how much is Jesus expecting his teachings to influence attainable human actions leading to moral virtue?
That is amazing. This is going to be the kind of preview for what we're looking at tomorrow. Tomorrow's lunchtime is on can we change? Is it possible to change? So this question is asking a variant of that question. How much good can we end up doing? How much virtue is attainable? The answer to all of this is coming to Jesus changes our moral taste buds. Actually, one of the signs that you've actually genuinely come to Jesus to receive forgiveness from him is that you, bit by bit, slowly and over time, you long more and more to become like him. You actually long more and more to be the very kind of person he calls you to be. And here's one of the ways life works. What you most esteem in life, you will conform yourself to, whatever it is. If what you most esteem is power, you will conform yourself to the image of that. You will become someone who throws your weight around. If what you most esteem is Jesus, you will find yourself becoming more like Jesus. It's a fact we see reflected in the world, and it's seen in the Bible as well, that we always become like the thing that we most worship. Whatever that is, whatever we think is most ultimate, most significant, we will eventually become like it. And so the way to become more virtuous is to become smitten with the one who is himself ultimate virtue, which is Jesus Christ. More on that tomorrow. So thank you for asking that question now to feed into what we're looking at tomorrow.
Yeah, cool. We're really grateful that you stuck around, you spent your lunchtime with us. I don't know how you guys found those questions, but we would love you to really think about them, really, and to continue conversations even though this Q&A time's ending. So Sam will be here at the front and a couple of guys in vision jumpers who can answer any questions. And don't forget, at 3:30, there's the Faith and Reason kind of cafe track in the cafe space through the entrance you came through. But we're so grateful that you've hung out with us. Have a really wonderful rest of your Thursday. Hopefully see you tonight. Doors opening at 7:15. Be blessed, guys. See you soon.
She was so sublime, super fine. She was never lying, strutting in the heels or her slides. Either way,